Hello, this is Marcus Pulis, and this is Aquarian Anarchy. Today I'm going to talk about a spiritual subject that is particularly influential on me, and that is the writings and philosophy of Aleister Crowley called Thelema. If you've watched any of my videos before this, you will know that a lot of my spiritual past had a lot to do with Aleister Crowley, and that he was a massive and continues to be a massive influence on my thoughts and where I come from when it comes to spiritual things. I actually credit him and that philosophy to leading me to becoming a voluntarist or an anarchist, because Crowley taught about freedom. He taught about not having a master and doing your own will. For those of you who aren't familiar with Aleister Crowley and his philosophy, because many times he's just made into this Satanist and he's just awful, which is pretty typical of what happens to people with new ideas or radical ideas, and Crowley's philosophy certainly was that. The history is relatively out there, and you can study it yourself in your own time. But for the purposes of this video, long story short, um, in 1904, Crowley, who had at the time pretty much just backed away from a lot of the spiritual things he'd been doing. He was a member of a fraternity before that called the Golden Dawn, which taught magical or esoteric thought. And in 1904, he was actually on his honeymoon with his new wife, Rose, and they went to Egypt. And part of what they did in Egypt was they went to the Great Pyramid, which apparently at that time you could just go stay the night at inside the Great Pyramid. Um, Many things have changed, but anyhow, Rose got possessed ish at the time and told him that he needed to show up in his study for 3 consecutive days and that he was going to receive a message. That message was a book called the Book of the Law. And within that book is a lot of, I guess, complicated language to a degree for someone who studies magic and symbolism. There's a lot there, and you can break it down and figure out what it is. Um, Thelemites, or people that follow Crowley's philosophy, will talk about that you're not supposed to talk about the Book of the Law and what it means. And if you're one of those, you probably ought to quit now because I'm about to be a center of pestilence, because I don't care. I don't have rulers, and Aleister Crowley certainly isn't one of them. I understand the point and where the center of pestilence and all of that comes from, is that Crowley saw what has happened to an awful lot of religions in the past, and he wrote a comment that is included in most copies of the Book of the Law that you find, where basically he says, just study this, don't share it with other people, get what you're personally going to get out of it, and the more that you study it and discuss, the more there's a chance that it will get perverted and changed to suit your purposes instead of the actual purposes of the book, which was to enlighten mankind and give you a pathway forward. So I understand all of that, and it makes some sense. And I'm not going to comment to tell you what you should believe or what this or that passage means or anything like that, because I do believe that what you get out of any particular book, whether it's that book or Murray Rothbard, is what you get out of it, and that the personal experience is very, very important. But what Crowley talked about largely in the Book of the Law is about freedom and about personal exploration. And he talks about in several other books, including the introduction to the Book of the Law, that he eventually wrote and is usually included as well. He talks about society moving from the paradigm of, he talks about cackling communists, doddering, and all of these different kinds of false births, if you will, of the Aeon of Horus, which is what he believed we were moving into. Democracy dawdlers or something like that, and all of that is a analysis of statist paradigm. And so, as I studied Crowley's philosophy, I started realizing, like I think Crowley would want us to, and I'm not trying to say that Crowley was an anarchist, because I think there's plenty of evidence that he wasn't. He preferred monarchy. He had his own opinions, but I think the philosophy, and if you believe that the Book of the Law wasn't actually written by Crowley, that was written by Iwas or his holy guardian angel or spirits outside of his body, then certainly what Crowley thought is relevant, but it's not everything to the philosophy. To back up, though, to that Crowley did believe in freedom, I have a few quotes that I want to introduce to you, and I've actually made memes of each of these that can be found on the Facebook page and those kinds of places, and I will likely include one of them as a cover to this video. But Crowley's philosophy is based around your will, and I need to at this point throw out the primary quotes, and there are two statements that matter to Thelemites. The first one is, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." The second one is "Love is the law, love and will." And many people take that to mean do whatever the hell you want, and Crowley would answer when people said that with, "Well, you obviously don't understand the English language. That would be do as thou wilt," which Anton LaVey, who started the Satanic Church, would change Crowley's words to "do as thou wilt" from "do what thou wilt." Doing what your will is, or doing what thou wilt, is doing what is core to your being, what is important to you, what makes you tick, what is the reason that you are here. And Crowley encouraged people to do that and to do nothing else. And the second statement is important, I think, because there is an emphasis on love and away from. There's no mention of violence. There's none of those kinds of things. People point to the third book of the third chapter of the Book of the Law and say that which is ruled by Robert Queed, is violent and this and that. And I think that it's very much symbolism. And if you look at it, that's not really so much the truth. Although he does say things like, "I flap my wings in the face of Muhammad and blind him. With my hawk's head I peck out the eyes of Jesus as he hangs upon the cross." Those are all quotes. I mean, Crowley certainly, within the Book of the Law, or Iwas, or whoever it was, is certainly going after organized religion and with a vengeance. But he didn't actually call for violence in that manner. I think that in a book, in many books actually, by Crowley, specifically The Laws for All, you can see the symbol set and how that's broken down, and why, for instance, Jesus gets his eyes pecked out, and Muhammad gets his wings in his face, and other forms of spirituality don't get such cruel treatment. They get lesser treatment. And the reason, to make it short, is that their point of view is less enslaving. And whereas both Christianity and Islam have done a lot to enslave humanity, and their philosophy teaches not necessarily from the Bible or the Quran, but by how it's practiced, they have taught enslavement of humanity and the denial of human nature. And sorry if I'm offending Christians or Muslims. I'm not intending to. This is my philosophy, and it was the philosophy of Aleister Crowley. But I wanted to start with a few, and we're almost 10 minutes in, but start with some quotes. As you could tell from those quotes that I used earlier, that will is very important to the philosophy, your true will. And Crowley said, "Will itself will grow naturally with greater freedom. And I think that that statement is absolutely true. The more you can find somebody and make their and even psychologically, as you go up Maslow's pyramid, if you're stuck at that bottom rung where all you can think about is, where your next meal's coming from and those kinds of ideas, you're never going to get to self-actualization at the top of the pyramid where you can focus on who you are and what you do. So if you're not free to eat what you will, and Crowley wrote a thing called Liber Oz, which I strongly suggest, where he talks about, eat what you will, um, basically live, paint what you will, all kinds of this and that's what you will, painting the picture that you should decide what you do. And so there's that. And so he believed that through greater freedom, we have a better chance at achieving the goals of whatever it is we're here to do, what our will is. He also didn't believe in messing around with other people's paths and other people's stuff. This is another quote by Crowley. He said, "It is necessary that we stop once and for all this ignorant meddling with other people's business. Each individual must be left free to follow his own path." And I think that's very true. I've talked about in several other videos that I don't economically agree with everybody that considers themselves an anarchist or a voluntarist. I'm not going to agree with everybody. I'm friends with lots and lots of people who use those titles, and I don't agree with everything that they say. Sure, there are people that agree with most of what they say. But I can find differences, and some of it's really simple stuff. But it isn't incumbent on me to say you're wrong. And I think that's one of the problems with Facebook is that multiple times on Facebook, people get bogged down by minutia, by what little bit of difference they find with each other instead of focusing on these massive things that they do agree on. And I think that if we just left people alone to figure out their own way, we, both spiritually and politically, we would be much better off. And it kind of comes along with, in my mind, the idea of being an anarchist, not believing in rulers, finding no ruler in heaven or earth. And, for me, that's what I try to do. I fail, I make mistakes, and I go after people when I shouldn't, and those kinds of things. But I think the assumption that you are always right is just going to be flawed. And it is better to communicate with people and share ideas and figure out what it is they do believe, so that you can either build on what you have or prove that you're right to yourself. Because it's more important to be true to yourself than it is to be accepted as truth by somebody else. But that interferes with ego. So another quote that I like by Crowley that I think supports the voluntarist and anarchist kind of opinion on things is he said, "Inevitably, anyone with an independent mind must become one who resists or opposes authority or established conventions, a rebel." It's been described of voluntarists that we are anti-authoritarian, and that's absolutely true. And Crowley, again, is encouraging people to think for themselves and to think in a manner that leaves others alone and doesn't say, "You're the boss," And to back that up, he also said of himself, "I do not want to father a flock to be the fetish of fools and fanatics, or the founder of a faith whose followers are content to echo my opinions. I want each man to cut his own way through the jungle." He wasn't trying to have Thelema or Crowleyanity or anything like that. He was trying to set people free. So many times in many of the discussions that I've had with people on spiritual thought, they say, "Well, Crowley said," well, you know what? Crowley can be wrong. And, I'm not using these quotes that I'm using to say that he's infallible. He is not infallible. He is not God. I mean, Crowley didn't really believe in God. And he believed in a spiritual substance, but he didn't believe that there was some overarching ruler telling everybody how to master their lives. Even when you consider the mythology that he presents within the Book of the Law of on the throne is Rahur Kuit, and even within all of that, it's a temporary situation. It's the energy that is kind of permeating the time period right now. He called this time period the Aeon of Horus. And the idea of the Aeon of Horus was a liberating time. And I think we're starting to really see that. You know, in many Thelemic circles, you see people who talk about the Aeon of Horus, and Crowley himself talks about this to a limited degree as well. But these aeons are supposed to be 2,000 years old, and if you compare that to the life of a person, you know, the Aeon of Horus is maybe a teenager at this point. He's not fully grown, and I think the maturity of Horus as that energy expands over the next 2,000 years, because we're talking about from 1904. You know, we are out of a 2,000 year period, we're just over 100 years. So if you figure, you know, that we're still beginning, but the maturity is starting to come. I was recently, last night actually, on a call because for many people, you may not know, I'm the press secretary for Adam Kokesh, and I was talking to Marcus Ruiz Evans and a group of people that he has set up. And what he is doing is he's got a group called CalExit, which is trying to basically gets Californians to secede from the United States. And those ideas, he has a coalition of 11 different states wanting to do that, wanting to bring things down to a more personal level, more of a individual level. And so many people from multiple states are organizing to bring the social structure down to the individual more and more. You know, from these big, overarching global ideas, which I do think the world is a global place. And I, like Thomas Paine said, you know, my country is the world, for sure. You know, that is absolutely true, at least until we have some space aliens showing up, which may be true, who knows, but I haven't met them. And there's proof of that, then we'll deal with it. You know, and hopefully they don't have oil because we'll have to attack. But, you know, to me, we are moving consciously, listening to these people who are not necessarily libertarians. Some of these people are conservatives or liberals, and they're trying to get to this idea of the individual being the societal portion that is in control, and being able to secede to your own home, to have your own property, your own individual sovereignty. And those ideas are catching on, and I think that is the process of localization that Thelema teaches. You know, and so many people that I know will point to, and it is true, that many people, especially in the Ordo Templi Orientis or the OTO, are very, you know, socialist in their political opinions. And I've never understood that. I can't explain that. I think that some of it can be explained by the fact that you know, things as they grow and move away from a source tend to take on their own life, and I think that the OTO has done that. It's become extremely centralized. The idea of which is set up to be centralized, whereas the AA, which I don't think I'm not in the AA, and I guess I am in the OTO. I'm not active, but the AA is a less centralized system. which is another order that Crowley created, and he felt like the OTO and the AA should work in concert. But I think that the problem with that in the OTO is that it is a centralized system. And so you do have bosses. You have, the supreme and holy king. I mean, that you can't get any more of a status title than supreme and holy king. So yes, there's a lot of that within the OTO, and I do not understand it. Don't understand it within Thelemic circles, because nothing says you're doing your own free will like giving it all to a federal government, or a centralized power, or some group of bureaucrats. That I have never understood it. I never will understand it. It's one of the many reasons why I'm not active in the OTO right now, is because I've got an aversion to that. And nothing against many of the wonderful people that are involved in the OTO, but that just doesn't and will not work for me. So Thelema, to me, it has been a massive influence, and you can see how a lot of those ideas came into being. Now, this is just an introductory video on the philosophy of Thelema. I'm not trying to get into the nuts and bolts. I'm not trying to do all that. I may at some other time. But I think that it's important as an explorer to be honest and explore those ideas and where they come from and how they can function. So I really do think that Thelema can be a good spiritual outlet for many people. That being said, don't let it hold you back. Again, Crowley does not know everything. Crowley is not God. Crowley is not he is not the master for me. I don't deal in masters. And my path has evolved away from many of the Thelemic ideas. And not so much the Thelemic ideas, but the Thelemic dogma that has grouped around, you got to do it this way and you got to understand this, and that doesn't work for me. Voodoo has a much better basis for where to build on, and I think that is important for me. But I really do think that Thelema can be your primary focus as a voluntarist. Recently met a guy from Germany who likely I will share this to his group, and he's talking very similar ways. He's talking about that Thelema is about freedom, and when you have a true understanding of what being an anarchist is, they're the same. And that's where society is going. So I want to end with a final, which will probably be what I make the cover of this as, a final quote by Aleister Crowley, when advice when moving away, because we aren't there. We're not in an anarchist society. There's still force and violence and coercion that is mandated by government. And that's the antithesis of what it means to be an anarchist. But going that way, the minarchists, I think one proof that Crowley does fall into that category is this quote. And he said, "Repeal all laws which assume that mankind is a herd of cattle." I like that. If you're going to start somewhere, good place to start. We are not cattle. We are an evolved species with individual thoughts, and to try to farm us is just antithetical to all the precepts of freedom taught by every single person that thinks about freedom. What I put into my body is my business. What I do, if I'm not hurting somebody else or taking their stuff, that's none of your damn business. And it's none of people in Washington, D.C.'s business. It's nobody's business. I live in Indiana. It's nobody's business in Indianapolis. It is nobody's business across town. That's my business. What I do with my body is my business. I own myself. So this is Marcus Pulis, and I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I will have some links to my Facebook page, the YouTube channel, and our store down in the bottom where you can get products and support what I'm doing, because this takes money, and everybody likes a little bit of money. People say we don't believe in money, but that's bull. Until you're handing them a $50 bill and they love you. So anyway, thank you very much for watching. Stay free.